My name is Eleanor Whitman, and 3 months ago, my daughter-in-law threw my suitcase onto the front porch and told me, "This isn't your home anymore." The words cut through me like glass. It was the same porch where I'd watched my son take his first steps, the same front door my late husband painted robin's egg blue because he said it felt like happiness. But that day, happiness ended with the slam of that door. I didn't cry. Not then. I stood under the gray Ohio sky, clutching that old leather bag like a lifeline, my heart pounding in disbelief. The house behind me, the house I'd built with 40 years of memories, suddenly felt foreign, like I was trespassing on my own past. I remember thinking, how does a person get erased from her own life? It wasn't always this way. When my son David and his wife Lena moved in, I thought it would be a blessing. The house had grown too big for one woman. I was getting older, and truth be told, I liked the idea of family filling the rooms again. It made the nights less lonely, the mornings warmer. We agreed they'd help with bills and I'd help with cooking and watching the house when they were working. It sounded simple enough, almost old-fashioned, like families used to do. At first it was fine. I liked having someone to share coffee with. Lena would sit at the counter scrolling through her phone while I scrambled eggs. She wasn't much of a talker, but I figured that was just how younger folks were. I'd ask about her work in marketing. She'd smile politely and change the subject. David, my boy, he tried to keep things peaceful. He'd work long hours at the insurance office, come home tired, and we'd all eat dinner together quietly. I told myself that silence was better than arguments. But looking back now, maybe that silence was a warning. Lena started making little changes, first things you might not notice unless you live there. My floral curtains disappeared one day, replaced with something minimalist. She said the old ones were too busy. My china cabinet was moved to the garage because she wanted clean lines. Even the smell of the place changed: vanilla candles instead of cinnamon lavender, instead of baked bread. It was like someone was slowly painting over me. I tried not to complain. I told myself, Eleanor, be patient. She's young, she's different, she'll learn respect in time. But respect never came. One afternoon, I came home from the store and found boxes of my things stacked near the door. My wedding china, my husband's old fishing photos, even the quilt my mother sewed for me when I was 20. Just decluttering, Lena said, smiling that cold little smile. We're trying to modernize. I wanted to shout, "This is my home," but instead, I carried the boxes upstairs and tucked them into the attic. It was easier to surrender a few memories than start a war. Still, I noticed how David's eyes started to flicker whenever Lena spoke for both of them. "We think you should take it easy, Mom. We think it might be time you visited your sister more often." It was always we. My son, my only son, was vanishing behind that word. Then came the refinancing talk. One Sunday after church, we were sitting around the kitchen table. Lena brought out papers, all business, explaining how refinancing could save us all money. I asked lightly, "Isn't the mortgage paid off already?" She looked at me like I was a relic. "Technically, yes," she said, "but it makes sense to put everything under David's name now. It's just cleaner." Cleaner. That word hit me like a slap. I felt my chest tighten. "Lena," I said softly, "this is still my house." She laughed an actual laugh. "Oh, come on, Eleanor. You're retired. You don't need to worry about all that paperwork." David looked at the floor. He didn't say a word. That night I sat up late, watching the light flicker across the living room walls, wondering when my home had turned into a place where I had to defend my right to exist. The next week was worse. Lena started inviting her friends over, without asking, young couples with expensive shoes and voices that filled every corner of the house. They'd sip wine in my kitchen, call the place cute, and talk about how they'd open it up or maybe knock down that old wall. Every comment felt like another nail in the coffin of my memories. I began spending more time on the porch just to breathe air that didn't smell like her perfume. The neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Thompson from next door asked if everything was all right. I smiled and told her I was fine. Because what else can an old woman say when her world is shrinking inch by inch? Then one Tuesday afternoon it happened. I was folding laundry when Lena came storming in. She said she couldn't do this anymore. I asked her what this was. "You," she said. "You hovering, judging, clinging to everything. We need space." I told her gently, I live here too. She grabbed my suitcase from the hall closet, stuffed some clothes in it, and threw it out the front door. "Not anymore," she said. "This isn't your home anymore." I heard the sound of the suitcase hitting the porch, an ugly thud that echoed through my bones. David stood behind her, frozen, his mouth half open, but no words came out. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the man I'd loved through every mistake, and I realized he wasn't going to stop her. So I walked outside, picked up my bag, and looked back one last time. The curtains, those plain ones she'd chosen, fluttered in the window like ghosts of my old life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there until the rain started falling, soaking through my coat. As I walked down the driveway, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, but something colder, a kind of clarity. I'd lost my home, yes, but not my power. I just didn't know yet how I'd use it. I reached the corner of the street, turned back for one final look, and whispered to myself, "We'll see about that, Lena." The rain had stopped by the time I reached the diner down on Maple Avenue. It was the kind of place where old men in baseball caps linger over bottomless coffee and gossip outlasts the breakfast rush. I sat at a booth by the window, watching the steam curl from my cup, and tried to steady my hands. It's strange how life can collapse in a single sentence. This isn't your home anymore. I replayed every word, every expression. The way Lena's jaw clenched when she said it. The way David's eyes darted away like a child who'd been caught lying. For 40 years, that house had been the anchor of my life. Thanksgivings, Christmas mornings, birthdays. Even the arguments that now feel almost tender in hindsight. And just like that, I was a guest in my own story. Mrs. Thompson from next door spotted me through the window and came in coat, still damp from the drizzle. She slid into the booth and patted my hand. "Eleanor, what on earth are you doing out here at this hour?" I told her the truth. I told her I'd been thrown out of my own home. Her eyes went wide, her mouth tightening with disbelief. "That girl's got some nerve," she said, shaking her head. "You built that house, for heaven's sake?" Her words made something inside me flicker, a small spark under the weight of shock. I'd built that house. My husband, Frank, and I had saved every penny for it, painted every wall, planted every flower bed. My name was still on the deed. That fact whispered to me like a secret I'd forgotten I was keeping. When I left the diner, I didn't go to my sister's like Lena expected. I went back home, but I didn't go inside. I parked across the street engine, off lights dimmed, and just watched. From where I sat, I could see the living room glowing softly, silhouettes moving inside. My living room, my furniture, my son sitting beside the woman who'd erased me. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world felt suspended. And that's when the sadness melted away, replaced by something cleaner resolve. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Avery. He'd handled the paperwork after Frank passed away, and he still sent me a Christmas card every year. When he picked up, I explained everything, the argument, the bag, the words Lena had said. He sighed softly. Eleanor, you do remember the deed is entirely in your name, right? Yes, I said. I remember. Then you're not the one who needs to leave, he said gently. You own that property outright. No one can throw you out of it. That single sentence was like oxygen after drowning. I thanked him and hung up, my mind suddenly clear. There would be no shouting match, no police visit, no drama, just facts. I waited until late afternoon when I knew David would be home. I walked up the driveway carrying nothing but my purse. The porch steps creaked beneath my shoes just like they always had. My front door was locked, which made me smile in a way I hadn't in days. I knocked once, then twice. When Lena opened it, she looked startled like she'd seen a ghost. I forgot something, I said calmly. She crossed her arms. Eleanor, I think it's better if you let us have some space right now. I nodded. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I came to do. I brushed past her and walked into the living room. She started to protest, but I didn't respond. I went straight to the hall closet, pulled out her luggage set. The fancy designer kind she bragged about, and carried it upstairs. David appeared in the doorway, pale and uncertain. Mom, what are you doing? Packing, I said. It's time someone had some space. I moved methodically, folding Lena's clothes, stacking her shoes, even wrapping her perfume bottles in tissue. My movements were slow, deliberate, like a teacher demonstrating a lesson. Eleanor, Mom, please stop. David stammered, but he didn't touch me. He just stood there, watching. Lena followed me up, sputtering. You can't just... I turned to her, still calm. You threw me out of my home, Lena, but it's not your home to claim. I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the deed, folded neatly. You see this? My name's the only one on it. Always has been. She froze, her mouth half open. I zipped up the last suitcase, set it gently at her feet, and met her eyes. You're mistaken, dear. This one's yours. The silence that followed was almost holy. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. David looked at the floor, his shoulders trembling. Lena's face went red, then pale. For the first time since she moved in, she didn't have a single thing to say. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I just opened the front door and stepped aside. You can go now. She grabbed the suitcase handle, jaw clenched, and stormed out without another word. The door closed behind her, soft and final. David sank into a chair. Mom, I don't know what to say. Then don't, I told him. Just remember who kept this roof over your head when you were 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. He nodded slowly, shame heavy in his eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the walls, the quiet. Everything felt different, lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The storm outside had passed, but another kind of peace had settled in. The house creaked and sighed like an old friend whispering, "Welcome home." I woke at dawn to the smell of rain on the grass and brewed a pot of coffee. The first sip tasted like justice, not loud or vengeful, but steady earned. There was still hurt, yes, but beneath it was something stronger, pride. That morning I realized revenge doesn't have to be cruel. Sometimes it's just truth spoken softly, but backed by unshakable certainty. The morning after I reclaimed my home, I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that tasted far better than I remembered. Maybe it was because for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. The sun came through the windows at just the right angle, lighting up the wood floors Frank and I had laid down together all those years ago. I felt him there somehow. Steady, approving. David came downstairs quietly, his hair still damp from the shower, looking like the little boy who used to shuffle into this same kitchen for pancakes before school. He stopped when he saw me. "You're up early," he said softly. "I never went back to sleep," I replied. He nodded, pulling out a chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and somewhere outside, a lawnmower started up life going on as if nothing had changed. "Lena's gone to her sister's in Cleveland," he said after a while. I figured. "She's angry," he continued, staring at the table. "Says you humiliated her." I smiled faintly. "I didn't raise my voice, David. Sometimes the truth humiliates all by itself." He rubbed his forehead, sighing. "Mom, I didn't want it to get this far. I just thought that keeping the peace was better than standing up for what's right," I said gently. He looked up at me, then eyes rimmed with guilt. "Yeah, I guess so." For a long time, I wanted to be angry with him. He'd stood by while I was thrown out of my own home. But looking at him sitting there broken and uncertain, I realized anger wasn't what I felt anymore. It was disappointment, yes, but also a strange kind of relief, like finally seeing something clearly after years of pretending not to. "You remind me so much of your father," I said quietly. "He hated conflict too. Always thought time could fix everything." David's lips twitched into a sad smile. Guess I inherited that part. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You also inherited my stubbornness. Use that part next time." He squeezed my hand back. The next few days passed in silence. David went to work, and I went about restoring what Lena had erased. I brought my old curtains down from the attic, re-hung the family photos, and filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and butter again. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. Mrs. Thompson stopped by with a pie, pretending it was a casual visit, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Heard things are back in order," she said with a grin. "They are," I told her. "It's peaceful again." "Well, bless you, Eleanor," she said, squeezing my arm. "Not everyone your age would have handled it with that much class. I'd have called the police." I chuckled. Justice doesn't always need sirens, dear. That evening, I sat on the porch with my coffee listening to the cicadas rise and fall like a summer hymn. For the first time, I didn't feel lonely sitting out there. I felt powerful, grounded. The world looked exactly the same, but I'd changed. And once you taste self-respect again, you never forget the flavor. Still, I wasn't blind. I knew David was struggling. He came home late most nights, quieter than usual, moving around the house like a man carrying invisible weight. Once I heard him on the phone, whispering to Lena, his voice thick with guilt. After he hung up, I found him sitting on the back steps, staring out into the yard. "Do you love her?" I asked. He startled a bit, then sighed. "I did. I think I still do, but I don't recognize her anymore." "Maybe she doesn't recognize herself," I said. "Sometimes pride can make people cruel." He looked at me with surprise. "You're not mad at her." "Oh, I'm mad," I said. "But anger fades faster than you think. What stays is the lesson." He frowned. "What lesson?" "That home isn't about who's loudest or youngest," I said. "It's about who respects what's already been built." He nodded, silent. I could see the words sinking in like water seeping into dry soil. Weeks turned into months. The house grew quiet again, almost too quiet. Lena never came back. She sent a few texts to David, cold practical ones about bills and logistics, but that was all. I started volunteering at the library again, shelving books, chatting with kids who reminded me of the students I'd once taught. It gave me purpose beyond these walls. I told myself I wasn't waiting for anything, but every evening I'd still glance at the driveway when a car passed half expecting to see David's headlights returning early. One Saturday, I found him in the garage sorting through old boxes. "I'm moving out, Mom," he said quietly, "just to an apartment across town." I felt a pang, but I smiled anyway. It's time I said, "You need space to figure yourself out." "I'm sorry for how I let things get," he said, eyes glistening. "I know you are," I replied. "Just promise me you won't let anyone make you small again." He nodded, and we hugged longer than we had in years. When he left that night, I stood on the porch, watching his taillights disappear into the darkness. I wasn't sad. Not really. The house behind me was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It felt alive again, mine again. As I walked back inside, I whispered into the still air. "You were right, Frank. Sometimes standing your ground is the only way to stay kind." I turned off the porch light and locked the door, not to keep anyone out, but to keep peace in. The house creaked gently as the wind passed through the eaves, and I realized it wasn't just a building anymore. It was a reflection of me, weathered, steady, unshakable. And for the first time in a long time, I was home. The winter came early that year. The first frost painted the yard silver before Thanksgiving even arrived, and the air carried that crisp bite that makes you pull your sweater close. The maple tree in front of the house, our old maple, was bare now, its leaves scattered across the lawn like pages torn from an old diary. Every morning, I'd stand by the window with my coffee, watching my breath fog up the glass, feeling both grateful and a little hollow. David had moved into a small apartment downtown. He visited on Sundays, bringing groceries or a new book he thought I'd like. He was really trying to mend what had cracked between us, but I could see the guilt still clinging to him like dust that won't wipe clean no matter how many times you try. Lena hadn't been back. Not once. Her name came up occasionally, mostly through small-town gossip. Someone had seen her at a cafe. Someone else mentioned she'd started a new job. But in our house, her name floated like smoke, faint and fading. I didn't hate her, not anymore. Hate is too heavy to carry through a cold Ohio winter. One Sunday, David came over with a turkey and a half-hearted grin. "Thought we could do Thanksgiving here," he said, "like old times." I raised an eyebrow. "You'll cook?" He laughed. "I'll supervise while you do." We spent the afternoon peeling potatoes, basting the turkey, and listening to an old jazz station on the radio. It felt almost normal. We talked about everything except the obvious until dessert. After we'd eaten, he pushed his plate aside and said, "Mom, I want to tell you something." I looked up. "All right." She reached out. "Lena said she wants to meet." The words landed like a weight on the table between us. "And what do you want?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should give her a chance. People make mistakes." "People do," I said softly. "But some mistakes come from who they are, not what they do." He sighed. I don't want to spend the rest of my life angry." I looked at him, then really looked at the man who'd been my little boy, who'd stumbled through grief after his father's death, who'd married too young and too hopeful. I understood what he was asking. Wasn't permission, but peace. "Then meet her," I said. "You have to live your own story. Just remember what home means before you invite anyone back into it." He nodded, eyes wet. "You'd still let her come here after everything." I smiled. This house survived more storms than one woman's temper. If she walks in respectful, I'll offer her a seat. That's how I was raised. He reached across the table and took my hand. "You're too good, Mom." "No," I said. "I just know revenge only feels good for a minute. After that, it leaves you hungry for something real." A week later, the snow came down heavy. I shoveled the walkway myself, though my back complained the entire time. Mrs. Thompson hollered from across the street. "Eleanor, you're gonna end up flat on your back." "Then I'll watch the clouds while I'm down there," I yelled back, laughing. It felt good to laugh again. That evening, the phone rang. David's voice came through calm but uncertain. "We talked," he said. "It was civil. She apologized for how she spoke to you, for how things ended." I didn't answer right away. The sound of the furnace filled the pause. "And do you believe her?" I asked finally. "I think I do," he said. "At least part of her meant it." "Then that's a start," I said. "The rest will show itself." "Would you ever forgive her?" he asked quietly. I thought about that rainy night, about the thud of my bag on the porch, about the silence that followed. Forgiveness isn't easy when humiliation has your name carved into it. But age has a way of sanding down sharp edges. "I already did," I said. "Holding on to anger just makes you live in someone else's shadow." He was quiet for a long moment. "You always surprise me, Mom." "I'm too old to start being predictable," I said, smiling. That winter, David began stopping by more often. We cooked together, fixed the leaky faucet, even painted the living room a warm cream color. There were still ghosts of the past in that house, but they were quieter now, content to linger without haunting. One night in December after dinner, David handed me an envelope. "It's a small thing," he said, looking bashful. Inside was a framed photograph, him, Lena, and me from years ago, back when we'd first moved in together. We were smiling, unaware of the fractures ahead. "I found it while packing some boxes," he said. "Thought you should have it." I traced the edge of the frame, my throat tight. "Thank you," I said softly. He stood up to leave, but before he reached the door, I said, "David." "Yeah. Whatever happens next with her or without her, you make sure you're building something you're proud of. Don't live scared of losing people. Live so they're scared to lose you." He nodded, his voice thick. "I will." When he drove away, I stood at the window watching the snow fall under the porch light, the world hushed and silver. The house creaked beside me like it was breathing. I turned off the lamp, whispered a quiet prayer, and went to bed with a strange peace in my chest, the kind that comes not from victory, but from understanding. Because sometimes revenge isn't the end of a story. It's just the clearing before you plant something better. Spring arrived like an apology that had taken its time. The snow melted into the soil, and crocuses began peeking through the thawing ground around the old maple tree. Birds came back their songs, light and careless, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel too big for one person. I'd gotten into the habit of sitting on the porch every morning with my coffee wrapped in a shawl, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids on bikes, mail trucks rumbling by, the smell of wet earth and cut grass, the small, ordinary rhythm of life that always felt like home. One Saturday morning, as I was pruning the rose bushes by the fence, a silver car pulled into the driveway. My first thought was David, but when the door opened, I froze. It wasn't him. It was Lena. She stepped out slowly, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, and there was a tremble in her voice when she said, "Hi, Eleanor." I wiped my hands on my jeans, taking a breath that felt heavier than the air around me. "Hello, Lena. I didn't mean to just show up," she said. "David said it might be okay." I nodded toward the porch. "You're already here. Might as well sit." We sat across from each other, the silence between us stretching like a wire ready to snap. The porch boards creaked under the rocking chairs, and for a long minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I was awful to you. I know that. I don't even know how to explain what I was thinking." I looked at her, really seeing her for the first time in years. The defiance that used to flash in her eyes was gone. All that was left was exhaustion and maybe shame. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly. "What's done is done." She swallowed hard. I need to. I was angry not at you really. I was angry at my own life. My mom walked out when I was 13. My dad worked 3 jobs and barely looked at me. When I married David, I thought I finally had a family that couldn't leave. But when you and I disagreed about everything, the house, the money, even what we ate for dinner, I panicked. I thought if I didn't control things, I'd lose him too. Her voice cracked. I didn't realize I was pushing everyone away. I stared at the chipped paint on the railing, thinking about all the nights I'd sat out here wondering how I'd raised a son who'd let that kind of chaos into our home. But the truth was, we'd both lost sight of what family meant. You did hurt me, I said. You said things I'll never forget. But I've had a lot of time to think about what forgiveness really costs. It's not about saying it's okay. It's about deciding not to carry it anymore. She wiped her eyes. Do you think there's any way to make it right? I thought about that for a moment. Then I nodded toward the garden. Grab those gloves. Help me plant something. It's a good place to start. She looked surprised, then smiled weakly. Okay. For the next hour, we worked side by side in silence. The sun warmed our backs, and the smell of soil and lilac filled the air. She was clumsy with the trowel, fumbling with the roots, but she kept at it. And somehow, that simple act, 2 women planting side by side, felt like an apology in motion. When we finished, we stood there looking at the fresh line of flowers. They'll grow fast, I said, if you water them. She glanced at me. You'll let me come back to see them. I gave a small smile. We'll see how they turn out. A few weeks passed, and true to her word, Lena started visiting cautiously, at first always, with a pie or a basket of strawberries, as if testing the air. Some days we just sat and talked about the weather, or the neighbors. Other days, she'd tell me about the new job she'd found at a local clinic, helping seniors with paperwork and scheduling. It wasn't perfect, forgiveness never is, but it was honest. And David, bless him, looked lighter than I'd seen him in years. The 3 of us even shared a meal again, grilled chicken corn on the cob and a salad from my garden. We laughed about old times, and when I caught Lena looking around the table with teary eyes, I realized she wasn't taking the moment for granted. That night, after they left, I sat by the window listening to the crickets sing. The house felt alive again, not because everything was fixed, but because the air wasn't thick with resentment anymore. Sometimes I think about that day she threw my bag on the porch. The anger, the shock, the humiliation. And then I think about how easy it would have been to stay bitter forever, to let one cruel moment define every day after. But life's too short to be ruled by grudges. The real revenge isn't throwing someone out of your home, it's reclaiming your peace and opening the door when you're ready. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered to myself, we're all just trying to come home in our own way. And for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of old memories pressing down on me. Summer came softly that year, with the kind of slow warmth that made everything bloom brighter than it had in a long while. The roses Lena and I planted were thriving bursts of yellow and pink that climbed the trellis like they were reaching for redemption. Every time I watered them, I thought about how strange life was. The same hands that once slammed a door in anger were now gently patting down the soil beside me. David visited every weekend, sometimes with Lena, sometimes alone. The 3 of us had learned the rhythm of peace, quiet, careful, and fragile. There were still moments when a certain word or look brought tension into the room, but they never lasted long. Time had done what shouting never could. It softened us. One afternoon, while I was baking peach cobbler, David showed up with an old box tucked under his arm. Found this in the attic, he said. It's full of Dad's things. I froze for a second, then wiped my hands on my apron. I thought I'd packed all that away years ago. He set the box on the kitchen table. Guess we missed one. Inside were faded photographs, baseball scorecards, a stack of letters, and his father's worn leather wallet. I picked up one of the photos. It was from the day we bought this house. I was standing on the porch steps, hair a mess from the wind, holding little David in my arms while my husband waved at the camera. Lena came in from the yard, brushing dirt off her hands. "What's all this?" she asked softly. "Memories," I said. "Some good, some hard." She pulled up a chair and looked through the photos with us. "He looked kind," she said. "He was," I replied. "Kind, stubborn, funny. He'd have given anyone the shirt off his back, though he'd grumble about it the whole time." David chuckled. "Sounds familiar." For the next hour, we went through that box like we were flipping through a shared family album of who we used to be. Lena listened, asked questions, and didn't once make it about herself. It was the first time I felt like she truly understood what this house meant to us, what home really was. As the evening light slanted through the kitchen window, she said quietly, "I think I finally get why you fought so hard for this place, Eleanor. It wasn't just walls and floors. It was everything tied to him, to you, to David." I nodded. It was never about ownership. It was about keeping the roots alive. She looked down, then whispered, "I'm sorry I tried to rip them out." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "You didn't kill them, Lena. You just didn't know how deep they went." That night, after they left, I stayed up late reading the old letters from my husband. They were simple reminders to pick up milk, short love notes scribbled between work trips, words of faith when money was tight. But one line stuck with me. "If this house ever feels too heavy to carry, remember it's not the walls that hold you. It's the people inside." The next morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: invite the neighbors over. We'd been a close-knit block, once potlucks, barbecues, 4th of July parades. After the whole mess with Lena, I'd withdrawn. But healing felt like something that needed to be shared. So I baked pies, called Mrs. Thompson, and told her to spread the word. By evening, half the block was in my backyard, laughter chatter kids chasing fireflies. David manned the grill, and Lena helped set out plates. At one point, Mrs. Thompson leaned over and whispered, "Didn't think I'd ever see that girl back here." I smiled. People change, Edna. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can. Later, when the night wound down, and everyone left, Lena and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. She handed me a plate and said, "You know, I used to think strength meant being the one in control. Now I think it's about being able to say, 'I was wrong,' and mean it." I smiled. "Then you've gotten stronger, dear." She laughed softly. "Still got a ways to go." I nodded. We all do. When they finally left that night, the house was quiet, but full, like it had inhaled deeply for the first time in years. I walked out to the porch, the moonlight catching the roses. I sat in my rocking chair and closed my eyes, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin. The revenge I'd taken packing her things, handing her that bag, had once felt like justice. But now I realized the real victory was right here. Peace, family, and forgiveness, growing stronger than the bitterness ever had. Sometimes you don't need to burn bridges. You just need to let time rebuild them in softer wood. I whispered into the night. "Thank you, though. I wasn't sure to whom, maybe my husband, maybe God, maybe the woman I used to be." Either way, I knew the storm had passed for good. Fall crept in quietly, the way forgiveness does, slow, steady, and somehow inevitable. The air turned crisp again, carrying that faint smell of leaves and distant bonfires. The maple tree out front blazed orange, like it was celebrating something only it understood. The house had changed too. It wasn't just the new coat of paint or the roses out front, it felt different. Warmer, lighter. Even the creaks in the floorboards sounded less lonely. David and Lena came by every Sunday without fail now. Sometimes we'd cook together. Other times we'd just sit on the porch with mugs of cider watching the wind scatter leaves across the lawn. There were no more unspoken words between us, just quiet understanding. One Sunday, Lena brought over an old recipe book. "I've been collecting your recipes," she said shyly, handing me a binder filled with handwritten cards and little notes. "Thought maybe we could make something together today." I flipped through the pages: chicken pot pie, apple crumble, cornbread casserole. Every recipe was one I'd taught her during those tense early days when we were still learning how to coexist. "You kept all these?" I asked, my voice soft. She smiled. "Even the one I ruined 3 times. I laughed. "You mean the banana pudding?" "I remember." We spent the afternoon baking together, and somewhere between the measuring cups and the cinnamon, I realized something: she wasn't my enemy anymore. She was family. Not by blood or paper, but by choice, by the long, messy road we'd walked to reach this peace. When the timer dinged, we pulled the pie out of the oven. It smelled like home butter sugar forgiveness. David came in from fixing the fence and grinned. "Now this smells like the mom I remember." I nudged him with a dish towel. "And don't you forget it." We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where anger once sat like an uninvited guest. But that day, there was only laughter and the easy rhythm of people who had finally let go of their old ghosts. After dinner, Lena helped me wash the dishes. The sink steamed with hot water and soap, and she said, "Eleanor, I've been thinking about everything, about how I treated you." I waited. "I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right. I know you might not need my apology anymore, but I need to say it." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't that defensive young woman anymore, the one who needed to win every argument. She was different, softer, grown. "I forgave you long before you asked," I said. That's how I kept my peace. She nodded, her eyes glassy. "You're a better woman than me." "No," I said. "Just one who's made her fair share of mistakes too." When they left that night, I stood on the porch and watched their taillights fade down the street. The house behind me hummed quietly, warm, alive content. I thought about the path that had brought me here, from rage to revenge, from bitterness to balance. I'd started this story thinking justice meant putting someone in their place. But in the end, it turned out justice was just another word for healing, when you stop needing to be right and start choosing to be free. As the stars blinked awake overhead, I whispered, "I'm home." Because home isn't something you can lose, not really. It's the people you love, the memories you honor, and the strength you build when life knocks you down and dares you to stand again. I went inside, sat in my rocking chair, and let the silence settle around me like a warm quilt. Then, speaking as if to an unseen listener, maybe the kind soul on the other end of an audio story, I said, "If you've ever been wronged, hurt, or cast out by someone who should have known better, don't let it harden you. Let it teach you. Because life has a funny way of circling back, giving you chances to show the world and yourself what grace really looks like." I paused, breathing in deeply, letting the moment linger. And if you're listening to this, maybe take a second to look around your own home, not the walls, not the roof, but the people, the memories, the love you've built. Tell someone you forgive them, or tell yourself you deserve peace. Either way, that's the start of healing. The wind rustled the maple leaves outside like gentle applause. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and whispered, "We're all just trying to come home one way or another."